Well, hello, avid readers. I am here with amazing Tosca Lee, and we are talking about some of her books, which are amazing, but she's amazing too. So, welcome, Tosca. Why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself for maybe someone who might not have heard of you before?
Okay, well, my name's Tosca. I live in Nebraska and I'm married to a farmer. And I have to say, that was a plot twist in my life I never saw coming. I married a farmer in 2016, so I'm coming to you from the farm today and every day. And I also became an instant mom of four when that happened because I married a single father. So that is my life. I show those things all the time on social media. We have a giant 160-pound German Shepherd named Timber, and my kids now are the youngest are twins, and they're turning 20 like this month. So we are almost empty nesters, which is and I'm going to be a grandma. I'm going to be a
What?
grandma in January. Yeah. So that's kind of new. My very, very first. So Winter, who's my oldest of the four, is having a baby in January. So and I'm a writer.
You're like, oh yeah, I write books. I mean, we have a farm, married to a
I
farmer, got a
was like
dog.
dog babies. Yeah. So yeah, I've written 12 novels, which is nothing compared to the number of books you've written, Trisha. I think 12. That sounds like a lot, and then I look at you and I'm like, okay, it's not a lot.
It is. It is though. But I remember, okay, so it's so funny because I remember I think it was when Demon came out, which we'll be talking about today. I'm like, wow, this sounds so amazing. And she's too beautiful. Like, I don't know. She must have had a ghost written because she cannot be that beautiful and like write that well too. That's
Oh,
totally what
that's
I
so
thought of
nice
when
of
I
you.
first
Thank
met you.
you. Oh gosh.
And now you're in Nebraska
And now
on a farm.
that's right. I'm a farm wife and grandma. I
And grandma, and that's so
need a
exciting.
grandma
And
name. I need a cool grandma name.
okay, so let me tell you the tip about the grandma name.
Okay.
So it's you have to think of what they can say first. So I went with Nana
Okay.
because grandma or all the different names. And so literally my grandson, my oldest grandson, he's just turned 13. My oldest grandson's 13. He said Nana because he would say banana. But then he would say Nana, and the other grandma is just grandma. And she's like, you got Nana.
You
And he
got
said it
Nana.
first. I'm like, I'm just smart. I figured out that he could say Nana before anything else. So
Okay.
so I'm Nana.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
have to give this thought because I feel like it's like a superhero thing. Like you have to choose wisely or something like that.
Yeah. And in the South, they do stuff like honey or like Dolly, or they have these like different, it doesn't have to be like grandma or Nana and stuff. But
Hmm.
yeah, lots of thought goes into that.
Yeah. I've got a few months.
You got okay, but let's talk about your books. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about Demon.
Mhm.
Okay, so when I first of all, it's an amazing book, but it kind of reminds me of like the Screw Tape Letters a little
Mhm.
bit
Mhm.
type of vibe. Just give us like the overview concept of this book because when this book came out,
Mhm.
again, I remember like this in Christian fiction realm. They're like, wow, everyone's talking about it. And I'm like, oh, she's beautiful. I don't think she wrote it. No, uh, but give us the premise for the book because I think it's one of those ones that as it's going along, like, whoa, like,
Right.
wait, a different form now. Like, I don't
Mhm.
know. It's just like there's so much going on that is cool. But what was your like heart behind it
Mhm.
and why you wanted to write that book?
Well, demon. So the title is scary, and some people are scared by the title, but don't be because it is not a scary book.
Right.
It's the story of a fallen angel, a demon, who approaches a Boston editor named Clay and wants to tell him his story. We don't know why for most of the book, why he wants to tell him his story, but he wants to tell his story, and he does. And so he's telling his tale from the time before creation up
Mm-hmm.
through creation to the present time, and it's in a way it's a really an outsider's view of the story of the Bible and the love story of God and man, and it's the story of grace, but it's told from an inverted point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's the short spiel about the
I
story.
love it. So and then we have Clay who's been hurt
Mhm.
So he's just gone through a divorce.
Yes.
He's a seeker, does like,
Yes.
and so you hear more about his life, well, actually through the
Yes.
demons, like the demons telling him parts of his life. So you
Yeah.
learn more about Clay from the demon relating things back, and he's
Yeah.
like, "Wait, how could you know this?"
Yeah.
But you see that he's a broken person,
Right.
and so and who's disbelieving that this can happen, right? Like,
Right.
why is this happening? And this is really creepy, and he's trying to figure out answers. But I think a lot of questions. So it's interesting because a lot of questions that people have about God and how can this happen and what is all this, it's like you said, it's told in an inverted way
Yeah.
through the book. So like, how did you even come up with this? Because I'm like sitting here blown away. Like, how did she come up with the storytelling in
Oh.
this manner where we're learning about the characters, like, it's being revealed, but it's being revealed through this other being
Mhm.
in a way that's kinda like that kinda gives me chills, but
Mhm.
it's also fascinating. So, I think the whole
Thank
thing
you.
you mentioned, it's not a scary book. So, it's
No.
not like one where it's gonna be like, "I can't sleep tonight because I have all these
No.
images."
Right.
It is so even though the title is that, it's, like, really wrestling with the things a lot of people wrestle with, but just told in, like, a storytelling type of way.
Mhm, mhm. Well, how I came up with it is I live in Nebraska. And I've lived in Nebraska most of my life, and in Nebraska, the roads are very flat and they're very straight, and so your mind really wanders when you're driving. That's how we get places here. We have to drive and, your mind just wanders, and I was trying to think of stories, and I remember thinking, like, what would it be like to be fallen, to be a fallen angel, and to know that you did one thing wrong. You made one mistake, and that separated you from God for one thing. And then you watch this race of clay people who are created, and they make
Mhm.
mistake after mistake after mistake, and then God gives them a Messiah, and God forgives them. And I was thinking, why do demons do what they do? Are they
Mhm.
tempting us? Are they trying to get us to smoke or eat carbs? Or and you're like, but no, there. But what is? And it occurred to me that there is a grudge match there. There's a grudge because
Mm.
we have been given the provision of a Messiah, and they have not. And what must that be like to watch that go on? And would you be jealous, and would you want to see those clay humans fail? And of course you would.
And of course, his name is Clay.
His
So
name's
it's a
Clay. Clay is the Emerald
representation,
Man.
yeah,
Yeah. Right, right.
which I
Yeah.
love that. And so I love so as I'm trying to figure out how to I don't want to give too much away. So as he is wrestling with this, we find out more of like God's plan.
Mhm,
But you said, but it's in an inverted way.
mhm.
So I would love to hear because it's being re-released, which is super exciting. But like, what have people said to you when they read this book, or what are things that really have resonated with them? Because sometimes as an author, like it's the things that we know we're trying to do, but sometimes the things that the reader says might be like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." Or
Mhm.
like what's some of the things that people are saying to you
Yeah.
or have said to you going through this book?
This book, out of all my books, is the one that people write to me with their most personal stories.
Mhm.
And this to me just it reminds me over and over that, we put the work in, we write these books, we send them to the publisher, we publish them, and then we don't know exactly the impact they're going to have in other people's lives. But this is the book that I'll get letters from people saying, this book saved my life. This book
Mm.
caused me to forgive an unfaithful spouse. This book, has done meant this to me over all these years, and I that's really cool for me. And also, it's cool for me just to see what happens, because I can't take any credit for those things. I never put
Mhm.
secret code in the book that said, "Go forgive your unfaithful spouse," or anything like that.
Yeah.
This is just a tribute to what God does with the things that we are doing when we do our work, and we give up the results. And every now and then, I think we're lucky enough to get to see how that impacts somebody. And so this book has really been that for me out of all my books.
Yeah. And it's so it's like dealing with him, and like he's trying to figure things out. It's also it's not like told just like this happens and this happens and this happens.
Yeah.
It's more like he's wrestling with things and he's trying to figure it out. Whereas I'm gonna switch over to the next book we're gonna be talking about,
Mhm.
Havah, which
Oh,
is the story of Eve. Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful.
oh, thank
It's
you.
but I will say, because I've been listening to the audio of both back and forth, because I'm like, oh, I wanted this, but then I'm in the car with the kids, so I'm gonna switch over to this one. So back and forth. Um, but it's still your voice, like
Mhm,
your voice completely is like kind of a lyrical storytelling. So
mhm,
even with Clay, with the Demon book, it's this roundabout storytelling where Hava is more a straightforward from her point of view.
yeah,
Of this is Eve. This is like from the moment she opens her eyes and what she experiences, what God reveals to her. The serpent with the Adam is what she calls him.
Adam, yeah,
But it's more a straightforward, just storytelling. But it's the same type of, because God reveals things to her.
mhm,
He opens up new insight to her. And so it's so cool as I'm
mhm.
listening to both of them. Like,
Oh,
oh, I love how she did this. Oh, I love how she did this.
uh,
Like it's totally your voice, but they're both so beautiful.
oh, thank
So let's talk about Hava and the story of Eve and what made you want to embark on that story, which loving it so much. I
you.
was in my car with the girls and they're 14 and 16, and like I'm like, oh, listen to this, it's Eve, and they're listening. Oh, actually I didn't tell them at first, and then I'm like, who do you think it is? And they're like, Eve. Like it's clear, like when it starts doing the Adam and then all these things. But it was so funny because when we were listening, I had already listened to part of it, and it was the part where it talked about like oh, I can't remember, it was arouse him or something, and then they're like kissing, and my daughters look at me and they're like, what type of book are you listening to? It like barely touched on it and then moved on, but it was hilarious the look on their faces when they're like, it was like the salt taste of salt against his neck or something,
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah,
then
yeah.
knowing that he brings arousal, I bring arousal to him. My daughter's faces, I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought this was a safer book to listen to in the car
Oh,
rather than
sorry.
Demon, but then I don't know.
Well, let's just say there's no explicit
No,
things.
it literally
Yeah,
like it
there's
would like barely touched on it, and it
yeah.
completely moved on.
My goal for that was to I wanted to portray perfection, and I wanted to show this perfect relationship and perfect
Mhm.
harmony and perfect accord before the fall. What would that be like? And I wanted the language and I wanted the relationship to be like sumptuous and like that. And so I really wanted to show, what is it like when you truly are one and the union is perfect. And
Mhm.
then we know what happens from there. And how does that impact their relationship among other things? Like, how does that impact not just them, but then the world around them and the animal life around them? And,
Mhm.
but I did want to show that they are very loving and,
Yes.
yeah. And so, I wanted it to feel sensual, but no worries. There's no explicit stuff. So.
There's nothing explicit, I promise you. Yeah, but it was just the looks on their faces when they're like, "Mom, what are
Can
you
I just
listening
say,
to?"
and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but there's nothing I dread more than like a kissing scene. They're so hard.
Yeah.
Like, give me a fight scene any day of the week. It's
Well, and it's so interesting because I sell a lot of books at homeschool conferences. And so the parents will come up and like, okay, so this is a romance book, and I'm like, they get one kiss at the end, like because it is hard. Like we want to show relationship, and we want to show like intimacy, but not like sexual intimacy. But we want to show the connection, but
yeah,
also our readers, we don't want to arouse things from the pages of a book. So that is like the balance of, and so I actually thought you did a really good job because it touched on it
thank you.
and then literally flipped to next scene. Like it was barely touched on
And then
it,
something else
and
happened.
then something else happened. Yeah. Yeah, but that's a hard balance because it's like we're showing this, but of course we're not writing the type of books that we are going to close it as soon as someone walks in the room because we're like
Right,
so embarrassed that we're reading that. Like
right. Yeah. I
that's
want
that
to
type of
feel
thing.
comfortable reading my books aloud to an audience. And
Right.
that's something I did during COVID actually, is I read every night for like 3 months straight and went through
Wow.
several of my books. I've never put makeup on so many days in my life. And we went through like 3 books, and I want to be able to feel comfortable doing that.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I wanted to be able to tell, like, at the homeschool conference, "Yes, your 13-year-old can read this book.
yeah,
It'll be okay." Like, there's nothing in there that
yeah.
I wouldn't have my 13-year-old read. But it reminded me, okay, I will say, um, some of the elements, like, of creation stuff remind me of C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia type of
Mm,
imagery and beauty and description
mm.
of stuff. I don't know, it's really cool. Not that yours is, like, copying it. It was just, like, some of the imagery was so beautiful, just as
Oh,
reminiscent of that, which is great. Oh, and then another thing I just loved is that the serpent had wings.
oh, yeah.
And I'm like, "That makes so much sense." Like, we don't
It
know,
made
but,
sense
I
to
mean,
me because if
yeah.
you on your belly you shall go after that, then
And I always pictured legs, like, legs,
oh, yeah,
and then on
yeah.
your belly you should go, and when it was, like, the golden wings unfolded, I'm like, I think I literally gasped out loud as I was listening to it. I'm like, "That makes so much sense to
Aw.
me." And then again, so I'm going back and forth between these books, Demon, and I'm like, they're actually very complimentary to listen to
Except
side
one's
by side.
Boston and one's Eden.
It's true. But yeah, but the voice and the imagery and the, introspection, I don't know, I like it.
Oh,
I love your writing.
oh,
You do great.
thank you. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Shit.
Okay, so, Eve, let's talk about this, and you're like you talked about wanting to see what perfection was. What type of feedback have you gotten on that? Because 'cause I'm just like, "Wow, this is fascinating." I feel like it is like, we Genesis 1 and part of 2 is just so short.
Yeah.
And it's like we get to experience it a little bit more, which
Mm,
I'm like, my husband is going to love, well, both of them really, but I think Hava, especially because we love like creation and talking about creation and talking about like what it would be like. And like,
mm,
even the book of Job, some of the things that Job talks about that were just part of his world that is no longer part of our world,
mm,
is just fascinating.
mhm.
And so I would love to hear like some of the feedback as readers have gotten back to you about this book too.
That this is, among my readers, this is, some a favorite book of a section
Mhm.
of them. I have readers who love my thrillers, and then I have readers who
Mhm.
really love my biblical stuff, and, Hava is a very different feel than, say, my thrillers, which have a
Mhm.
completely different, voice, but I this is a book that I've had people write to me and say that it impacted their relationships. And
Mhm.
once again, that's just one of those things where I think I had nothing to do with that, and it's so cool to see how these books go out in the world and what they do. Um, I've had people tell me this is their favorite of mine. Um, so it's the feedback has been really wonderful. Um, that said, not every book is for every person. So some people prefer the thrillers or others. But this book is very close to my heart. It's a little more lyrical than some of my
Mhm.
other
Mhm.
books.
Mhm.
It was one I really had to struggle with. I was going through some very difficult things in my own life as I wrote it, which always seems to happen,
Yeah.
as you know. And there were, I committed to writing this book before I dove in. I committed to it having sold it on one page. And then when I dove in, I thought, what have I gotten myself into? Because there's so many questions that have to be answered in a satisfying way for the sake of the story and need to be somehow plausible. Could it have been this? So, how long did Adam live in the garden before Eve came along? And what did that serpent look like? And did the serpent really talk? And did other animals talk? Or how did that work? Or what was this fruit? What did it look like? I mean, it probably wasn't an apple, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Did they know what death was? I mean, how did they know what death was? Nobody had died before. So how did they understand what this was? Or did they have any understanding of it. And how did it happen when they were chased from the garden? How did they learn how to make sacrifices? And how did they learn their basic skills for living? And, things like that. And also, did Cain know he was killing Abel? And what was the mark of Cain? And all these things,
You're
you
like,
get in there,
what
you're like,
did I
"Oh,
do?
no, what have I done?" And so it was a really interesting and amazing journey to go through that story to that place.
Mhm.
And I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, and I love that we can explore these things. And so I've been reading through the Bible chronologically. I have a podcast that's reading through the Bible chronologically. I think like so many things that we feel like are unexplainable, when you read it chronologically, it actually makes a lot more sense than we think it does, because
Mhm,
we read the history, then we read the poetry, then we read this, and then reading it chronologically, like, oh, this is tied to this. And this is why this person said this. And so I think while there's a lot of mystery still,
mhm,
um, there's a lot more answers
mm,
than we think. Like the fact that Job was written like before Abraham or early in Genesis, like all these different things, and the animals and the descriptions that he has. So that's what that was reminiscent as I'm listening in audio to your book. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I see this in Job, or you see this in different books of the Bible. So, I mean, while we can be creative with it, there's a lot in there too. So
there's a lot.
there's you've had to take some artistic license, of course, to
Yeah,
things, but there's
yeah,
also a lot more that I think isn't preached in a 45-minute sermon on Sundays, or isn't like when you get into God's word, it just amazes me the layers, the connections, the descriptions of things is fascinating. And I think
mhm,
the more, it's like one of those things, the more you read the Bible and study the Bible, the more. And so why you said like I loved it, that's why I feel like doing this podcast where we're reading through chronologically and talking through it, like I'm learning all the time, and
mhm,
I love it. And then there's like more questions, and then you study more, and it's just like this depth, which shows you it's like the word of God, because the more you dig in, and the more there is to discover. So that's
yeah.
amazing.
I think as you feel that you get more answers, you also come up with more questions.
Exactly. Yeah.
and and early on when I was younger, I always felt like I needed to know all the answers. And now as I dig for plausible answers for things like a story, like this, or my book, for instance, about Judas Iscariot,
Hmm.
I'm digging around, but at some point I realized I was coming up with even more questions than I had before. And maybe it's just being at the stage of life, but I feel like I'm okay. I'm more okay with not
Hmm.
knowing certain things and with a certain level of mystery than I used to be, say 20 years ago or something like
Yeah.
that. There's some things I can't know right now, but I'm more okay with it today, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah. And the more we just walk with God and see God at work and experience different things, yeah, it's like, okay, I don't know what that was about, but you have to
I
just
don't know what
trust.
that was about. Yeah, and I think book writing is like that because you put it out there
Hmm.
and you don't know what kind of ripples it's gonna make or who's reading it, half the time. Um, but that's okay too. That's okay too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so one fun thing, and this is near the beginning, so I feel like it's okay to talk about.
Mhm.
Just Eve like running with the lion. I think a lion
The
was a lion.
lioness, yeah.
Yes, and like her strength and how swift she was, because as we're recording this, Olympics is happening,
Oh,
and you see, first of all, when I watch it, I'm just like, and you see the different competitions, right?
mhm,
And you're like, man, like humanity is amazing. How
mhm.
one person's body can do the flips and one person's body can like throw the shot put, and the others are like super fast. And so as I'm listening and watching, clips of the Olympics or whatever, it's just like what God created is amazing.
Mhm.
And then when she's running with the lioness and how swift, I'm like, yeah, it was like perfect body, right? Perfect
She's
form.
genetically perfect, so,
Yeah.
in the book, she can keep up with with the lioness. And I always think about, when little kids will say, watch me run or watch me do this, and they want you to watch them. And I just had this image of Eve saying to her creator, watch me run,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
wanting that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think it's just a glimpse of when we see intelligence or we see, physical, outward, different beauty and in all different ways. And when we see like athleticism in so many different areas, it's like, wow, like how humans can like expand and come out with all this is just amazing. I don't know, those are thoughts that came into my mind as I read your novels. And I think that's the cool thing about fiction is that you wrote it and you have the thoughts in mind, but every reader that reads has their own experiences,
Yes.
their own thoughts of what they're going through, and so it's truly a unique story for each person,
Hmm.
even though it's the same novel that we're all reading.
I'm a
So
big believer in the fact that the reader is co-creating the story
mhm.
with you, and maybe imagining it completely different than the way I imagined it. The scene might have different colors, or different sounds, or
Mhm.
but I love that, and I love that it's different for each person. And I think that's why I never like the question when people say, like, what do you hope readers will take out of this book, which we've been asked 500 times or more.
Exactly.
But and because what a reader takes out of it depends on what they bring to it and where they are
Mhm.
and their own experiences. And I love that.
Yeah, and I love when someone come up and said, "Oh, I love your imagery of this and how it made." I'm like,
Hey, right.
that I'm glad you got
Thanks.
that out of it. I know, I'm so amazing that just puts all that in there.
I had somebody say, I like the way that you were making commentary about this or that. And I was like, I was? I mean, yes.
I know, exactly.
I'm really not that smart.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, we okay, going back to Havah,
Mhm.
God took clay and kind of with demon too with clay. God took clay and breathed into it the breath of life and the imagery. I mean, like man was formed, and that breath of life truly is inspiration. And that's as we sit down, you're like, I was just like my mind was wandering as I'm driving down the street, but I almost feel like God going, like, here's some breath, here's some inspiration into us. And so that's
Ah,
what I love. It's like, okay, God, I'm exhausted right now. Like,
mhm.
I need you to breathe. I need you to breathe some inspiration. And it's amazing when we show up how God always shows up. Like, well, the only reason we can show up is because God showed up first. But
Right.
when we're there and we're open to Him and we're like, okay, like you said, all of a sudden, like, what have I got into?
Yeah,
Like, it has to be God breathing His inspiration. And that's why other people will get different things out of it because it's like God's inspiration as they're reading now. It's
yeah.
just so cool. It's just amazing. So you can tell I've been in your books for a week because all of a sudden I'm like poetic. I don't know.
Well, I
Oh,
appreciate you listening to them. I truly do. And I'm always amazed by, I love audiobooks, and I'm always
mhm.
amazed by the narrators and
Yes.
what a hard job that must be. And, people will say, like, did you read your own book? I'm like, no, you don't want me to read my book. You want a professional. And it's always amazing to hear how they bring the story to life in a different way, and how it sounds like a different story to me when I listen to it, because I like to
Mhm.
hear how they do it. And I'm always amazed at these narrators. They're so good.
It's so true, and it's really like even the inflections they have or the pauses they have. I'm like, oh, like because it's
Yeah,
their interpretation too.
yeah,
Like I didn't imagine that conversation going like that. Like even with the pauses and stuff, but oh, I like it. It's so fascinating.
yeah, yeah. All these possibilities of how this sentence could have sounded. It sounded to me
Mhm.
this way, but now I'm hearing it this way, and it's fun.
Yeah, it's so cool. All
Yeah.
right, so they're available now on Kindle and paperback and audio.
And
So
hardcover for the first
and
time.
hardcover.
Yes, for
That's
the first
so
time.
exciting. So
So
exciting.
fun. Yeah.
I love that so much. So definitely you need to go check out these books. I mean, I would just say look get both of them and listen back and forth. I don't know. I'm getting a truly unique experience out of that just doing that.
You're gonna be like, "Wait, there was a lioness in Boston? Wait a minute,
I
wait a
know
minute."
exactly, exactly. But yeah, it is hilarious, and I'm like, well, we're gonna listen to this when the kids are in the car. But yeah, it was like because I'm like, I thought Demon would be too intense. Although they're 13, 14, and 16, it's not gonna be too intense, like you said.
Yeah. They're
It's
yeah, the teenagers are used to a lot of intensity, I
I know.
think.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So where can people go to find more information about you and these books and all the things, Tosca?
Yeah, toscalee.com. Also, you can find me on social media. I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I do some TikTok, some, but I find it kind of hard to keep up there. But I do a little, and you can see the dog, and you can see farm life. I
And
call it the
spoon
funny
ground,
farm.
baby. Yeah.
There's always something going on. I mean, if it's not like fighting raccoons in the sweet corn, there's always something,
Chasing chickens,
chasing
all the things.
chickens. I've done that too. It's always something.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Well, thank you, Tosca, for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.